At some point in TV history, dads became bumbling idiots. At some point, dads started to be portrayed as incompetent. Who do we have on this list here? Fred Flintstone, that was 1960 to 1966. You have on here Archie Bunker, that was 1971 onward, and even in today, you have dads like Homer Simpson. Dads can't do anything right. And it's tempting to think, yeah, back in the good old days, dads were portrayed as being competent, dignified, and they may have been a little emotionally detached, but they were portrayed as solid figures. Not really. When we go back, as far back to today's scripture passage, it opened with the words, "This is the story of the family of Jacob." And then it goes on to describe Jacob as an incompetent dad. I don't know if you caught it, but it's kind of based, it's Dad 101. You know you're going to create some tension between your children if you favor one of them. Now, I'm sure that each of you here privately has a favorite kid, but you're smart enough not to tell the other kids about it. Jacob, again, not that bright. He made it very clear to the rest of his kids, Joseph, that is my favorite one. Dressed him up in some fancy dreamer's coat. And his brothers realized, Dad loves you more. Like, if that's not enough, Dad 101, don't let it be known that you have a favorite child. The other thing that Jacob did was he trained Joseph as a child to tattletale on his other brothers. That's what the story I read is about. The brothers have gone off to work. They're tending sheep, they're doing business, they're taking care of Dad's company. And Dad takes young Joseph aside and goes, go spy on your brothers and then come back and tell me if they're getting into any trouble. It wasn't the first time, because obviously from the story, the brothers knew that that is exactly what was happening. We got Dad giving his favorite son a special coat and then sending him off with that sign of favor to go spy on his brothers. And Joseph, he's kind of oblivious to what it is he's walking into. Dad fails Dad 101 course. This story, the story of Jacob, which is the story of Israel, is a story that once again gets messy, and God has to come in and clean it up somehow. This story about incompetent dads doesn't start with Jacob, because you'll recall that his dad, Isaac, kind of goofed things up when it came to giving the blessing when he was on his deathbed. And if you want to go back before that and read a couple stories from Dad Abraham and this whole sacrificing your child and sending another one of your children off into the wilderness to possibly die, this is not a new theme. Again, it's like life itself. Now, here's a painting of Jacob hearing the news from his brothers that his favorite son has died. They show him the bloodied coat that's been given. They tell him that some wild animal has devoured him, when in reality they threw him in a pit and then he got sold into slavery. Things were going pretty well for Jacob up until this point. Jacob was in the middle of the best years of his life. He got past all of that juvenile, immature, young man stuff that got him in trouble with his brother, that got him hoodwinked by his father-in-law. And things were obviously going well because he had all these children, all of this property and flocks, and he's in his advanced years. You know how when you get a bit older, you're able, usually it's with your grandchildren, able to spoil them in ways that you didn't have the time or the resources to do back when your children were the same age. Well, that's what Jacob is up to at this point in his life, but with his younger son, Joseph, just spoiling him and enjoying the best years of his life. And in this picture, this moment that he's told that his favorite son has been killed, the good old days come to an end. The good old days come to an end. Before we get to that, just let me fill in some other parts of the story, and this is where the story is going to be left off. As you heard in the scripture passage, Joseph got pulled out of the pit, and he's sold into slavery. The people who bought him, they brought him to Egypt, Egypt was the powerhouse of the region in those days. Pharaoh was everything. And Joseph lands in Egypt. And if you remember the rest of the story from your childhood, Joseph ends up interpreting some dreams that no one could figure out that the Pharaoh had, and ends up being placed in this top government position. And that's when he kind of rescues his brothers and his dad from famine, and they're reunited, and they all land in Egypt. And the good old days are back again, except give it a couple generations, and suddenly all of the children of Israel in Egypt are again in slavery. And you've watched the movie, The Ten Commandments, and you know what happens next. That's where we're going to draw our story to a close that we've been following through the summer. To this point where the good old days are gone, and the promise, the blessing, the hoped-for story that Jacob has now been just pulled away, sold off into secular society, into Egypt. That's where we are today as the Christian church. The good old days are gone. And when people think about encountering God, when they think about spirituality, they don't think about coming into this family, into this house. They search for it out there. Here's a quote from Mark Twain. "Alas, those good old days are gone when a murderer could wipe the stain from his name and soothe his trouble to sleep simply by getting out his blocks and mortar and building an addition to the church." The good old days had problems. The good old days were, if you wanted to succeed in society, if you wanted to climb the ladder in society, Well, you belong to a church. And I'm glad those good old days are gone. I'm glad that, as you've heard me joke before, coming here on Sunday morning ain't gonna get you anywhere in town, in society. We've had to rethink, what is the purpose of worshiping God and coming together as a congregation? But the thinking needs to continue. Here's where I'm going to transition into sort of the State of the Union address. Update you on what's happening in the congregation and what to expect in the coming months. So most of you will know, and this is part of the reason for doing this, so that as many people know as possible, that we are in conversation with Kerwood United. Kerwood Bethesda, officially, right? Kerwood Bethesda United Church, to amalgamate. Kerwood Bethesda, now really Kerwood, has been looking at how they're going to wind down as a congregation. And so they've reached out to us about amalgamating with us. So that triggers a whole bunch of governance decisions. So I'm going to give you a timeline here of what has happened. In April and May is when there was some informal back and forth. Kerwood checking, are we interested? The regional office of our denomination sort of checking whether we are interested, doing some research on our side, looking up just what's involved in the process. And then in June is when we had an initial meeting with some representatives from Kerwood United Church, along with one of the regional staff people in our denomination. And then that's also when we started looking at this as your council, the governing body of this congregation, to really do a hot and cold test. Should we check further? Should we pursue this and find out whether it is viable? And the consensus with council, with the information that we had, was, you know what? This ain't such a bad idea. Let's do some more looking at it. So that brings us to July and August. And our council, a few weeks back, established our representatives to a negotiating team. Our reps from Strathroy United Church to sit down with the reps from Kerwood and to do the official process of making a proposal, creating a simple document, putting it on paper so that a proposal can be put before you as the congregation to discern whether or not that's what we might do moving forward. And so what you're going to see happen is the opportunity to think about and study the proposal. In September, assuming things continue in the same trajectory, in September we'll have some meetings after church for a couple Sundays so that people can ask their questions, so they can learn about what's in the proposal, and to get really an informal sense, where are people at? Before we get to an official congregational meeting in mid-late September, for you to vote on whether you think this is where God is calling us moving forward. That's the timeline, and I'm hoping that you start talking about it, start chatting about it, asking questions. And that for folk who are at home, and for people who may not be watching at home, but are members, part of this congregation, who are probably in September going to have this experience. What do you mean we're talking about amalgamation? How come I didn't hear anything about that? You'll hear about it from watching the video, because every week you watch worship online. But of course, there are going to be people who are going to be surprised about this, and there'll be a lot to discuss. But before we get to a congregational meeting to vote on it, I'm hoping that we'll have already discerned what it means to be of one mind about this. This brings us to the reality that congregations are shrinking. Today, Kerwood and Bethesda. Tomorrow, Strathroy United Church. One of the obvious advantages of an amalgamation is we will combine two groups of people and hopefully become stronger as a group collectively. But that dance can only happen so many times. Pulling in other congregations can only last so long. The struggle is, how do we grow new members in the congregation? Now, you're probably grateful. I haven't been on this horse for a while on Sunday morning. But you know I like to ride this horse hard. This is, every now and again, I'll self-publish an article to share with fellow colleagues and with my students. And so this week's was addressing that very question. What is it that we need to do as United Church congregations to grow? More than simply, let's just keep amalgamating and not learn how you get new people. So for the balance of the sermon, I'm gonna ask you some questions to start you thinking. And let me frame this again. We're gonna be really busy for the next number of months, potentially planning for a wedding. And you know what it's like planning for a wedding. You kind of stop doing everything else because it's just so exciting, picking out the menu and planning the party. In that time, I want us to also be mindful, how are we going to leverage the second breath, the second wind? If we bring more people together into one congregation, we create a stronger critical mass of people. But if we don't leverage that strength, well, it was all in vain. So there are various theories. I don't want to bore you with the theories about how it is that congregations grow. But each of the theories, pick one, has some questions about strategy that go with it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. One of the strategies is called the rational choice theory. And it boils down to this. Why in the world would anybody get up on a Sunday morning, drive to Strathroy United Church, and sit here for an hour? Why would anyone want to do that? That's the question that rational choice thinking asks. What's the cost and benefit of belonging to an organization, belonging to a congregation? And so that's the question that we have to answer ourselves. Why would anyone choose to get up early on Sunday morning and go to Strathroy United Church service? What value that matters to a newcomer does attending Strathroy United Church add to someone's life? And how do we communicate these reasons to people in our community? Say you're bold enough to walk up to somebody at the downtown market and say, I belong to Strathroy United Church. Hey, maybe you should come see us. And they say to you, well, why would I want to do that? I don't know. I mean, it starts with, you have your reasons for being here. And again, no one is here because it's going to get them a promotion at work. No one is here because it's going to make them more esteemed in this community anymore. And yet you're still here, despite a lot of the benefits no longer being available to you. Why are you here? How do you articulate that? Because that's your testimony. That's your story. One of the other theories as to how churches grow is called the limited enthusiasm theory. In a nutshell, it means the only people who really invite newcomers to church are people who are new themselves. Whenever you join something, you're excited about it, and you want to tell others. And so this theory is people who are new to a congregation, they'll tell their friends, hey, I'm going to Strathroy United Church now. You should try that out. Despite the minister, it's actually an okay place. And that enthusiasm lasts for a limited period of time because the person really runs out of people to invite. Like, we only know so many people. Yeah. I could stand here and say, you know what you all need to do? You all need to invite someone you know to church. And the reality is, you've exhausted all of your friends and all of your options. Because either people you know, they go somewhere else, or they've already made it clear to you, I'd rather go fishing on Sunday morning. That's why in this theory, it's the newer people who have relationships that can bring a new invitation. So the questions that this theory asks are, how do we empower, or on the negative side, what are we doing that encumbers newcomers to invite other new people? How do established members reinforce this is where I can't see this, a positive or negative first impression with newcomers? And how do we harness this newcomer enthusiasm to re-energize established members? That's one part of this theory. Everybody likes being on a winning team. Put differently, everybody likes playing with toys that someone else is playing with. And you live long enough in a family, and you kind of like take it for granted. Yeah, I belong to Strathroy United Church, it's okay, but you know. And then a newcomer comes along and like, holy smokes, Strathroy United Church, despite the minister, what a great place. And they invite people, and then suddenly the established members go, oh, well, maybe other people do want to play with this toy. I want to play with it too again. Enthusiasm breeds enthusiasm. How do you catch that enthusiasm a second or a third time? The demographic theory is basically this. Doesn't matter what you try as far as inviting people. If you ain't got new people in your area, you've already run out of people to invite. Living in this is the challenge that our rural congregations are experiencing. No one has 12 kids anymore. Rural areas are being depopulated. Corporations are buying up the land. And so for a rural congregation to look out into its own backyard and say, who can I invite? The truth is, there is no one new there. Strathroy United Church, we live in a rather unique demographic reality, don't we? As much as you don't like the traffic and the Toronto drivers, it's growing. And so this is a place where there are new people that we don't know and that we will meet that can be invited. And so this theory asks these questions. How do we advertise with new residents in our community? And will new residents see our congregation as a gateway into community participation, to meet people and to have civic engagement. All right, so I've thrown a lot of questions at you. I'm going to end the sermon now, going back to where we started. The story of Jacob is a story where the good old days ended, and suddenly the trajectory moved into the strange new land called Egypt. And God had to figure out, how do I get this thing on track again, given what these brothers have done to Joseph? God remains faithful, but God's faithfulness needs to work through us. We are the people who will figure out, how do we go into Egypt, and how do we continue to be the good news so that people in this community go, oh, I'm not going to go to church because it's going to help me make more sales. I'm not going to go to church because it's going to help me get that position I'm looking for. But if I go to church, I'm going to be with people who understand that there's a higher purpose to life, and that God wants us to be good news for those who need it. I'm going on holidays for 3 weeks. I'll leave you thinking about that while I'm gone. Let's sing a song.